all looking forward to today's panel. Very excited to be joined by Holly Armitage, Sophie Hebdidge, Harriet Shaw and Amandine Flachs. I'm going to hand over to Holly, who will facilitate today's session. If you have any questions, let us know in the chat throughout and we will make sure they get asked.
Hello everyone and welcome to this lunchtime panel at the Athena Code Show. Today we're going to be exploring what being a female founder in today's world looks and feels like. So my name's Holly, I'm a strategist at BAE Systems. I have the privilege to chair our session for the next hour, and I'm joined, as Will said, by a stellar lineup of incredible talent from our industry. And as I kind of host you all from my kitchen table here in South London, it reminds me how different this year's code show is from the past couple of years. So normally we'd be kind of taking questions in person and really inviting you to join in our conversation. And this year is no different. We really want you to join in and share your thoughts. So please either kind of drop your comments and questions in the message box on YouTube. Alternatively, you can tweet your questions and we'll be sharing the details in the YouTube link in a minute. We're going to try our ultimate hardest to cover as many questions as we can. We've got a good Q&A session planned for the last part of the session. Any questions we don't answer, we're going to try and tweet our responses over the next few days. So please follow the Athena hashtag and keep your questions and comments coming. So as I said, I'm kind of sat here at my kitchen table, and it's a nice reminder, or not a nice reminder maybe, of how kind of the brutal necessity of now a year's worth of social distancing and restriction measures have actually amplified the use of technology to work, play and stay connected. And the last year has seen the digitisation of life really, with numerous business opportunities springing up and thousands of startups mushrooming every month. So it's perhaps not that surprising that amid a global pandemic, the UK has maintained its lead as being one of the world's leading centres for technology of all kinds. So a bit of a Google this morning showed me that the UK tech startup and scale-up ecosystem is valued at $585 billion. And last year, tech venture capital investment in the UK hit an absolute record high of $15 billion, with us here in the UK just slightly lagging behind the front runners of the US and China. And also another fun fact, the UK is now the unicorn capital of Europe, with herds of unicorns and their valuations of over $1 billion living in Manchester, Oxford, Leeds, Bristol, London and Edinburgh. And we all know the technology sector is a driving force for our economy, driving job creations not just in London, but all over the UK, with the digital economy employing just shy of 3 million people. And a quick search on the job market shows that 10% of all current live UK job vacancies are for the technology sector. So kind of coming on to kind of tech founders, and we know, and whilst the past decade has seen more female-founded startups emerging and more women enjoying success at the highest level, the scales remain far from equal. The tech sector as a whole, if we've been exploring at the Athena, struggles with its gender makeup, and this is a theme also shared with the entrepreneur sector. So our exam question today, well, maybe not today, in general really, is how do we collectively overcome these challenges and empower more women to lead and launch tech startups? So to explore this, I am delighted to welcome 3 talented, inspiring and game-changing women to our Athena Code Show panel. So let me ask them to introduce yourselves. Sophie, do you want to hit off for us?
Be good if I unmuted myself first, wouldn't it?
I go 3 minutes in, I like it.
So hello everyone, my name's Sophie. I am the founder of a company called Techniclarity. Before I started Techniclarity and before I tell you about what Techniclarity is, a little bit about my background. So I work as a software developer by trade. I have built products from apps, radio stations to sex tech apps to kind of a whole host of different things. I used to teach people about cybersecurity through a chatbot. So I've always been in this tech world. And a couple of years ago, I decided to set up my own startup. I was in the founding role of CTO. I had an incredible co-founder who worked as my CEO. So my responsibility was to build and develop our product, basically, to build all the tech that went around it. Great fun, amazing. But one of the things that I noticed while I was in that space, because everyone is so well connected in such a supportive community, especially in the UK, was that there were incredible women that had ideas for businesses, didn't come from a tech background, didn't have that same background as me, that just didn't do anything with their ideas. They didn't get them out of the starting blocks. They stayed as ideas because that barrier of technology and entering that world and working with technical people was too high. It was so overwhelming for those individuals. So when I wrapped up working on that first startup, I decided I would start Techniclarity to solve that exact problem I'm talking about there, to encourage and enable more women to do something with their ideas by opening up the door to the tech knowledge I have and sharing that with them. So that's what Techniclarity does now. We're an education company that teaches anyone with an idea for a tech product just enough tech, so not the whole world, but just enough so that they can get it off the ground and get going and take on that responsibility and exciting role as leader of a tech startup and as a female founder.
Amazing. Thanks, Sophie, for that introduction. Harriet, over to you.
Hi everyone, thank you for having me. And Sophie, thank you very much for making the mute mistake before I did. That just reminded me not to do that. And hopefully everyone's okay. I know it's been a really tough year last year and the beginning of this year, so I hope everyone's okay. Really nice to be here today. So I am a venture founder, so a slightly different angle that I'm coming at innovation from. So I'm starting a brand new venture, but I'm doing that from within a massive corporate company. So I'm here to really talk about kind of that different experience of starting a startup, but from within a massive corporate. And it's something I'd like to share about because I've always been interested in startups. That all first started, I did a master's after uni because I didn't know what to do, actually in entrepreneurship. And that's when I started getting really interested in startups and how they work. But I didn't feel ready to make the leap. And perhaps that relates to what Sophie was just saying. I didn't feel ready to make the leap and start my own startup. So I've kind of got into a big company and then moved into their innovation hub, and then from within that I've started this new idea. It's called the Fin Crime Testing Service, and just a bit about that, it's an anti-money laundering idea. So we're helping banking detect money laundering. So kind of come at that from a completely random angle, and now extremely passionate about all things financial crime. I'm really happy to kind of share some of that experience today. I've taken that idea from the very first inception of the idea, and we're currently on the cusp of getting our first ever paying customer. So yeah, I'll be happy to share all about that later in the talk, but that's my intro. Thanks, Holly.
That's great. Thanks, Harriet. And Amandine, over to you.
Hi everyone. So my name is Amandine Flachs, and I am the CEO and co-founder of a startup based in London called Wild Meta. We are an AI company, and what we're doing is we are helping video games developer create smarter and more human-like games AI using machine learning. And before that, so I started Wild Meta in 2019, but before that I used to work with early stage tech startup for about 10 years in France, in the USA, and in the UK. So what I used to do is work with very technical people and help them on everything non-technical. So I think since I've been working all my life, I think I started I was 18 when I started working with startups. And all my life, I've been super excited by technology, but I am not technological by I would say by design, but no, but let's say by my education, right? I have never learned to code or anything at school. I don't have a technical degree, but because I've been working with technical people all my life, I understand the struggle. I understand what's missing, what they don't see, and what they see that I don't see. And so I try to make the connection all the time. So I've worked with very innovative founders And I used to really jump in at an early stage and help them go to the next step, whatever the next step means for them. So it could be helping them on the product launch or helping them growing the team. So it really depended on the situation. And so that means that I have been very involved in the startup ecosystem and community. So right now I am still involved in this community, even though I am on the kind of the other side, since I am a founder now. And being involved in the startup scene, I do different things. I do lots of mentoring, especially for female founders and anyone from a diverse background and minorities. I am also a VC scout for an investment fund based in London, investing at seed stage. And I also have my YouTube channel where I host live AMAs with startup founders. We talk about the challenges, the small wins, everything that really is about building an early stage company. And I try to now share a bit more about my journey. I need to do more videos, but yeah, I try to kind of show the behind the scene.
That's great. Thank you so much. No, brilliant, Amandine. Thank you so much, everyone, for introductions. And you can see a real mix of people from our industry here as well. So, looking forward to this session. So, Sophie, I'd love to have a point with you. So, when I was doing my kind of online looking up at you, I saw on your website you said that only 20% of founders are women. I can't seem to work out whether I'm shocked it's still so low or kind of impressed we actually made the massive progress in the last few years. I think when I think about it, we're not actually short of talented women in the UK. So what do you think it is that's kind of holding women back or deterring women?
Yeah, it's such an interesting question. I'm so pleased you asked me it, because that stat is, it's not a good stat, really, is it? I mean, we might have made progress, that might have come along, but it's still not at the place that we want it to be. And I was spending a lot of time thinking about this and looking at the research around it. And the most interesting piece of research I've seen that kind of explains this is that when it comes to coming up with a business idea and actually starting that, men choose not to start their idea because they don't believe that the idea is good enough. Women don't, because they don't believe they have the skills to do so, which is so, if you think about the wording of that, they don't believe they have the skills to do so. It's not that they're not talented, it's not that they don't have the skills, it's that innate belief within themselves that they are capable of doing it. And I think for me, it's not that there aren't individuals out there that could be amazing. It's that there's not something pushing them to actually go and do it. There's not that confidence and belief within themselves that they can make their idea a reality, and they can create the business that creates the life they want to live, basically. So the way I personally tackle that is through education. It's by focusing on increasing individuals' skills and belief that they do have those skills and knowledge of the wider area so that they can do so. There's so many other initiatives going on. There's funding initiatives, there's mentoring initiatives, there's communities, all these different pieces play a part. And the piece that I'm really plugging at the moment and that I'm really working on is that education, is increasing those individual skills, especially in the areas that are new to us when we're founding a business. I've started my business recently, and oh my God, there's so much I don't know. And I'm not afraid to admit that, but it's up to me as the founder to go and invest in my learning and invest in the areas that I don't see as strengths, to minimize those weaknesses so that I can work with individuals in the best way. So it's a great question you ask, why we're in that position. And I don't think there's a firm answer as to why we're in a position where there's only 20% of founders are women. All I know is that there's so much good work being done to increase that number.
No, thanks, Heather. It's really, really interesting. Everything about kind of there isn't a one size fits all, and about kind of you've got to just, it's not about being the best technologist. It's about broader skills, commercials, negotiating. I know, Amandine, Harriet, any thoughts from you both on this?
Yeah, I just have one thing to add, which, because I probably experienced a bit of that myself. And for me, I was particularly worried about like financial literacy because I studied sciences at uni, and I left with kind of, I felt like no knowledge about businesses, how financial stuff works. And when people were speaking to me about profit and loss or return on investment, I was feeling really unconfident. And I actually went away and did like an online MBA on the side of doing my job to kind of try and increase my knowledge. And to be honest, I probably didn't need to do that. It's very much like a confidence thing where you just learn on the job, and I was probably a bit scared to learn as I was going, so I felt like I needed to educate myself more. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. It's amazing, and you can build confidence over time, which is what's happened to me. But I guess just a message there that don't be scared to kind of learn as you're doing it, as well as kind of feeling like you need the educational background to do something.
So it's really interesting point about the financial literacy, isn't it? It's interesting, kind of link on to Sophie's point. It's more than just tech. I think everyone's highlighted on this call in their introductions that technology is one of the badges they wear. It's not just what they do as well. Amandine, how about you? What do you think it is that's perhaps deterring or kind of not helping women fulfill their whole potential?
Yeah, I think education is one thing, and it's good to have initiatives that cover education and help people better understand what they could be facing, help them with their challenges and everything. But also, I wish we didn't really need that, but also that we were treated equally in the same way as men. It's funny. Years ago, I remember when I started networking, I was always thinking and overthinking what I was wearing, how I would present myself. And then every time I was just thinking, what would a man do? And will they really ask themselves this question or not? And most of the time it was a big no. And I think the problem we have is with representation, and also with the fact that every time you have an event around entrepreneurship or around any topic and you have women, well, women are asked about being a woman and not about the business. And I'm pretty tired of that. I want to see women being asked the same question, women being represented in a panel without being the woman of the event. So that's what I want to see. And I think education is good and we need it, and lots of initiatives are doing an amazing job. But we also need to have the discussion outside of the people who understand the problem. Having an event or a panel about women's problem in tech or as entrepreneurs in a room where you only have women, it's like preaching people who are really convinced. And it makes sense to have this discussion with people who are not the people targeted here. And people who are, well, on the other side and don't necessarily see that. So I wish to see that more, actually, and to see female founders treated as founders first. Hopefully it will come.
No, a really, really key point, isn't it? We are SMEs first, and then our gender is probably is the least interesting thing about us. The fact that we're all SMEs. And I suppose a question to you all, in terms of the training and support you've been doing, like what's the one thing that's kind of really helped you all over the last couple of years? Because Harriet mentioned doing an MBA, which was useful, perhaps on the job learning. No, what's it been for you, or what's been that piece of education that kind of unlocked your potential?
I can go. So I don't want to talk over anyone. Should I go?
No, go for it.
For me, it's really been about mentorship. Because I'm starting a startup from within a bigger company, it's been a wonderful way to do my first startup, because I have mentors all around me that I can draw upon when I don't know something, and that's given me a huge amount of confidence over the last 5 years. And I think having someone that you can turn to say, oh, I've got this issue, and it might be something really specific. One example that springs to mind was I had a big problem around data ethics recently, because one of the things I'm doing at the moment is trying to help banks detect human trafficking, and that's thrown up a lot of ethical questions. And I had someone internally that I could turn to ask about that, which was really helpful. So mentorship is, my number one thing that I would say has helped me, and not just internally. I've actually reached out externally as well to find mentors. So I would say don't be afraid to do that, because I've actually internally I don't have a role model in terms of that's the role I'd like to do. So I've looked for that externally, and approached people on LinkedIn and said, I really want to do your job or do something like you. Can we have, a quarterly call or something? And everyone's been so open to doing that. So yeah, I'd advise getting yourself a mentor, and then also mentoring people. So making sure that you're also turning back and then helping others on your similar journey. I think that's really important.
I love that, Harriet, especially the role of paying back what the kind of support you get. No, really interesting point.
Jumping
Amandine, I can see you're jumping in. Yeah, go for it.
Yes, jumping on mentoring, I think what you say, Harriet, is really true. And one thing that I'd like to stress about mentors is that yes, you can have one or two mentors, and they're the people who you're going to when you have questions, and they are the people that are going to have lots of experience and going to be able to help you. But also, mentoring doesn't have to be that formal. So the good thing about formal mentoring is that you kind of have a safe space where you're going to be able to open up, and because you have established that this is the relationship, this is how much I'm going to take of your time, and that is how much I'm going to give you of my time. But then there is also another type of mentoring that people don't necessarily see as mentoring necessarily, is that, as you said, just reaching out to people, learning from their experience, just having a chat. And for that, you don't need to have to reach out to people who have an extended experience. You can learn from anyone. You just need to be in this mindset of learning, of trying to listen in a different way, not just listen to be able to react or say something about it, but listen in terms of, okay, how does this reflect on my own business? How can I use that in some way? Or in the opposite way, sometimes you get advice and you always have to take a step back thinking, this is one story, this is one experience. Does this have to work for my own company? Maybe not. Maybe this person doesn't necessarily get your vision, or maybe the lack of technical information about what you do, whatever it is. It's just one experience, and you need to take what you want and not take everything necessarily, because you're always going to get lots of different feedback, and not everything is good to take, and not everyone is part of your target audience also.
Yeah. I think that that's so true what you've just said about like picking and choosing the pieces of information that you I think you should listen to everything, but only hear certain things, and use your existing knowledge and expertise to pick and choose the pieces that you really react to. I think that's one of the things that's really key as a founder, is to like put a filter in place where you are, observing what's going on, but also looking at your field of reference is probably much wider than that individual that's come in and given you half an hour of their opinion. So that is like a super important skill, and one that takes quite a long time to hone as well, I think I would say. For me, one of the main things that's helped me is pretty similar along the same vein, but is communities. So I've actually joined two membership communities specifically for women starting businesses, and they have been probably, like, I pay for both of them. It's the best money I've spent to help me out on this journey, because you can get that ad hoc one-off mentoring specialist chats with the individuals that are in that group, and it's that feeling of solidarity with people also going through and doing the same thing as you, all in the same boat. So when you are having a particularly rubbish day and you need a boost, that group's there for you. When you're have had a particular big win, you get to celebrate it with other people, rather than it just being you and your laptop in those early days when you don't have that team around you. So that for me has been super key.
Now, there's some really interesting themes that are coming out, aren't there, around kind of communities, networks, sharing experiences, you know, kind of, I imagine being a founder, I'm not a founder, but I imagine being a founder can be quite lonely at times as well, which is, yeah, it's a difficult thing. I suppose kind of linking on to that point, so Amandine, tell us a bit more about your entrepreneurs playing games. So I suppose what would be interesting to hear, perhaps for our people on the call today, is kind of what are those reoccurring conversations or the themes that you hear coming up time and time again?
Yes, so Entrepreneurs Playing Games is a side project for me. So again, I am the founder of Wild Meta. So this is my main project. And I actually recently did a video on side project because I think it's well, entrepreneurs tend to be involved in many things, and sometimes it can be hard for some people outside to understand what the main project is. So I can't stress this enough. My startup is definitely what's taking all my time and all my headspace, but I also have side project. And so this is my YouTube channel where I host live AMAs mainly with startup founders. So about every 2 weeks we go live. Initially it's called Entrepreneurs Playing Games because we used to play video games during the discussion to bring a very friendly vibe and open up, because my focus is on early stage founders. I want to talk about what it's like to be building a company in its early days, and not, well, it's very interesting, but I don't want necessarily to hear about success that happened 10 years ago and companies that are doing really well. I want to talk about how it is and what people are thinking when they are facing a challenge right now, something that they haven't yet figured out. And so that's what I've been doing for now almost 2 years. And so I've been interviewing entrepreneurs from different backgrounds, different country now, because we now move to fully remote interviews. And so there are indeed some topics that are coming regularly. I would say, well, there is always the question of funding and access to investment, because, well, when you're an early stage company, you either have a model that lets you make money well straight away, or you have to think about raising money. And so this question about getting investment is always present. But most of the time, the founders that I interview are in a process of pitching right now. They're already talking to a few investors, or they managed to get a bit of money to get started and are now talking to the next step. So it's not for them about understanding or really getting started with a bit of money. It's more about how to get access to money to go to the next step. So we're talking a lot about investment. I think also something that comes up a lot is the importance of communities. Most of the time, founders mention how they've been involved in some ecosystem, how they've joined an accelerator, what kind of support it provided, mentors, being surrounded by people, or even building your initial team with your co-founders, finding co-founders, how everything started. So we talk a lot about this origin story where they've met their co-founders. And another thing that I try to also put some light on regularly is the flexibility of startups. I really like to deep dive into pivot, or with COVID, for example, better understand how these companies have faced the situation and what they've done. Because believe it or not, whatever your business model, even if you think you haven't been affected by COVID, you actually have in some way. And so everyone has adapted the way they're working, whether it is about getting fully remote team, or maybe moving to different countries, changing the way you're proposing your services because your customers are changing, or even just the way of marketing your company. So I find this fascinating about early stage startup, is that you are flexible. So you have to learn constantly to be listening to your market and to be able to change your approach whenever you need it and whenever it makes sense. So this idea of flexibility, we don't necessarily, well, put some word on it, but usually we always talk about changes that happen and how the founders had to quickly react and do something about it to go over it.
And that's really the point about flexibility and responsiveness is really interesting. Sophie, Harriet, kind of what does kind of flexibility and responsiveness kind of mean to you in your world?
Yeah, I mean, it's I think it's kind of everything in our world, and especially in the startups that I see myself, that I work with. I think, we can all make plans and we can all try things out, and that's very much part of the startup mentality of starting something, taking that leap, doing something. But the real gold comes from having that flexibility and that ability to just quickly adapt what you're doing, adjust, tweak what you're doing, not necessarily always a huge pivot, but it's all those that kind of nimbleness that really enables people to succeed. I definitely see, and I think, yeah, without nimbleness, I mean, we'd all be doing the exact same thing as we were doing 18 months ago or longer ago. And can you imagine that now? Like, things have changed so much. The world would have changed anyway without everything that's happened recently, and it's up to us to stay ahead of that. And I think that's pretty exciting. That keeps things interesting. And I think if someone wants to create something and stay only in a set mindset and only do that one thing, then I don't know if they're the right person to be creating something. It's you've got to have that flexibility to really thrive in this world.
No, I love that point about, founders need to be kind of nimble, being able to kind of pivot and flex. And give me kind of an interesting question. So there are 1,001 books in the market about how big corporates can be more like a startup, be more small, be more nimble, be more this and that. I was going to flip it around to you, Hattie, because you're in quite a different position. You are being incubated with a kind of big corporate. So I'm going to ask the reverse question. Is there anything you think a startup or founders can learn from, that big corporate in terms of behaviours or culture, or is it a one-way street only?
Yeah, definitely. I could probably talk about this for hours, so cut me off. But I think there are lots of differences between being a kind of more traditional spun out startup that's venture backed versus an incubated startup within a corporate. And I think there are positives and negatives to both. I think I'll major on the positives of corporate innovation because that's my experience. I think we talked about the mentorship. That's a really big positive already. I think the number one positive is access to your first customer, because that is a huge issue for any startup. Like trying to get out there as a completely unknown brand and approaching your first customer to try and get your first paid engagement can be a huge problem, and often sometimes where startups fail. And when you're part of a big corporate, you can have access to those corporate customers. And the way that my startup has worked out is that I've been able to approach already existing customers of the large corporate to pitch my startup idea to. And indeed, our first customer is going to be an existing customer of the big corporate. And I think that, it not only gives you credibility and a way into the customer, but it also, from a paperwork perspective, it accelerates you. Even having said that, I think it's taken me over a year to engage my very first customer. So it's absolutely one of the most difficult things I think about starting a new company is getting money in the door for the first time. And I think that's a real advantage of corporate innovation. And then a couple more things to dwell on. So one is the difference in risk and I guess incentivization of the individual founder. So when in a kind of more traditional venture startup, the founders are hugely incentivized to make that startup a success because, for simply put, if the startup fails, then they don't have a job. Whereas I am an employee of a large corporate. So if my startup fails, I still have a job. So the incentive structure is quite different. And I think, that's a really interesting thing to dwell on. It's something I've thought a lot about, how you're incentivizing people that are actually employees to go above and beyond is really difficult. And I think that's sometimes where corporate startups can go much slower than external startups, because perhaps the staff aren't incentivized quite in the same way. So I think that's an interesting thing to think about. And then, finally, and it relates to the conversation we were just having, is that the innovation team that I'm part of has a really strong ethos that I'd like to share, because I think it's really good. And it was relating to what we were saying about flexibility. And that's to be really problem focused. So always to ask yourself, what is the problem that your startup is solving? And we have seen so many people, like Sophie was saying, have an idea, don't want to change it, spend loads of time kind of developing cool, interesting tech, but they don't really understand who their customers are and what problem those customers have. And I actually spent 6 months before I even came up with my startup idea speaking to anti-money laundering professionals. So these are people that they work for banks and they have to detect money laundering. I spoke to them about what are the problems you're facing with your day-to-day job, and what we did was kind of look for the problem in common across the industry. And then we knew that when we came up with the idea to solve that problem, that many people would be interested because lots of people had that problem to solve. So that would be like kind of my number one thing I've taken away from working in this corporate, is that ethos. And I'd take that to any startup that I would launch and hopefully launch in the future as well.
Nice, thanks. That's really interesting. And I suppose then, Amandine, Sophie, coming to you, I'm not sure if you went straight from kind of school, university into startup, or you kind of had a corporate life somewhere. Is there anything you've taken from corporate life or kind of past startup life into your kind of current ventures and startups now?
Yeah, I haven't had that much experience working with corporate, to be honest, within a corporation. I had a job once in a big company. I was 19 and I got fired after a month or so. So yeah, not the best experience ever. So what happened is that I started working with startups when I was 18. I was still a student, but I quit school before my business school degree, so I didn't really finish my study. But I've learned so much working with startup, and I think it has been a big point, a big turn in my career early on, to just have the opportunity to have a voice within the company and directly be involved in big discussions, big decisions. And I think because of that, it has been very difficult for me to have a traditional job, I would say, or to work in a bigger organization where there are rules, because what I've done all my life is kind of break the rules, not in terms of not acting the proper way, but more in terms of challenging everything, because that was my role every time I work with a startup. I join because either there is a need to do something or because something is not working properly. And so I come in and I ask the hard question. And so it is expected from me, and it has always been since I first started with a startup, that I just voice my concern. I voice some proposition to fix that. It's not just about complaining and raising the problem, but it's also about finding solutions. And that's something, within corporate or talking to corporate people, I never really fit in, and I think I wouldn't, and I think I will never be able to find a job in a big corporation, because it's not how I work. It's not how, it's not me. And it's funny, but yeah, I never really worked properly in a corporate, and I'm sure there is a lot of things to learn in terms of structure, but I've always learned by doing so far, and just getting within startup, being here, brainstorming with the founders and trying to find solutions to have them right now. So that's what really has helped me and shaped my entire career.
That's really interesting, Amandine, isn't it? There isn't one career path in being a founder. So anything from you on that point?
I've never thought about this before, but just listening to you both, I'm like, I've got so much to say on stuff I took from my corporate career. So when my first ever job was for a big bank down in Canary Wharf. I did that as a graduate scheme, and we had to do this activity where we had to meet up with different directors from around the business. That was something that was required of us. And I have 3 pieces of advice that I still think about today that are like snippets from those conversations. So the first one is spot the opportunities where other people don't spot them. Everything you're presented with is an opportunity, so take advantage of those. I think that's great advice. Another piece of advice I got while I was there was just ask. The worst thing that happens is that they'll say no. And I think that's huge for an entrepreneur. Like, why not send that LinkedIn message? Why not stick your hand up when you're at a talk, or drop a question in the comment box on YouTube when you're at a panel? Like, why not do these things? Like, the worst thing that happens is that someone says no, or you don't hear back from them. Like, and we all move on and the days carry on. And I think just asking a lot of times, yeah, I've had a lot of no's, but I've also had a lot of yeses, and people be really excited that I've asked them specific and direct questions about things, and that's really helped me build up relationships with external people to my company as I've gone along, which is the third piece of advice I got through that initial activity while I was on my grad scheme, was to build relationships, and that those relationships will sustain you, and they will last, good or bad, so try and make them good. The only other thing I've learned from my corporate career, and this is a role I did more recently, actually, I did a contract for a corporate, and they were intent on measuring everything. Everything had to have a metric. Everything had to have a number. And to me now, today, in my company and with startups I work with, everything I do now needs to have a metric, because how do I know if something I've done is working, if something needs to change, unless I have a number in front of me and I can say, I was at this, I did this, and it got me to this. That's good or bad. What do I do off this now? It's just having that conscious thought about, how am I going to see if this was a success or not, and measuring it. And that has really come through from my corporate life. And I'm not sure a lot of startups think in that way, actually. I think many startups think a lot more flexibly, and kind of like the nimbleness we were talking about earlier, but it's about being nimble in a logical way that's backed up in the right way with the right data, I guess.
No, thanks. I think, yeah, to just ask. I think on the just ask point, any questions, please do wrap them in the comments box. I think there's some interesting things about kind of how do you show value. And I suppose let's pivot and explore a kind of a spicier theme of investment. We've touched on it already a little bit. And I suppose that's kind of arguably perhaps the biggest challenge confronting every founder, regardless of sector. I suppose when I was kind of looking into and doing my research for this panel, you know, I saw that less than 3% of venture capital investment goes to startups with female founders. Yet research from the Boston Consulting Group found that for every dollar of investment, female-led startups would generate a better rate of return than other startups. I suppose I'd love to explore this question with each of you, really. So kind of, Amandine, kind of what advice and prep do you give to kind of, you know, your early stage founders when you're working with them?
Yes, well, that's a big question. That's a big question. I think I could actually prepare a talk, an entire half an hour talk just on that topic. But then also every startup is different. Yes, but there are many things that you can find with VCs. So when you start talking to external investor, it's a good exercise first, because it can be very challenging, and that's kind of their job, to challenge your idea, to see if it's a good fit for their own fund, but also if there is a potential large enough for them. And something that I think my first tip would be for founders: do your own research first. Try to understand how VC work, how a fund works, because people tend to forget that it's a company. In the end, they receive money from people, they try to invest it, and then they have to make a revenue out of it. They have to have return on the investment. And so sometimes I've seen some companies pitching to VCs, and I'm just wondering, do they understand that just by the nature of the business, it doesn't necessarily fit a VC fund. And so it's a good idea, and yeah, you know, go for it. But it not may fit a VC because they have these criteria, because they have to make money back. And what this means is you need to have several rounds of funding. So if your idea just need a large amount of money right now, but then is not going to raise another round in a year or two, then it doesn't make sense for a VC to put any money in, because they're not going to go out. I mean, you're not going to be acquired, or you need to have a clear plan for that. So try to understand how VC work, and also do your own research in terms of the VC, what they have to you know, how they fit with your company. So you can find lots of listing of VCs in your area. You can find lots of information like that. But the exercise is not to reach out to everyone, but to reach out to people who make sense for you. And sometimes you need to think, do I want money? Or do I want more than that? Do I want smart money? And that means maybe a fund that have connections in your industry, or a VC fund who have invested in business model that works like yours, and so they can really give you some feedback and some support and some connection. I was trying to raise money for my own company a couple of months ago, and eventually we decided to bootstrap a bit longer. We actually pivoted our model and everything, so we kind of changed a bit the direction. But I saw that I was wasting lots of my time just talking to people who weren't a good fit. And you know, it's hard when you're a founder to be like, oh yeah, no, I don't want to talk to you, for some time just saying to a VC who is interested in taking the discussion further, just saying, no, I'm not interested because I don't want to spend that much time talking about that with you, because you know, I didn't want to say it, but sometimes they're not also a good fit for you. And even if money is a big point for founders, I mean, most of us are bootstrapping, not paying ourselves, and we have a big vision, and we think that money is going to change everything. Well, it's actually the beginning. But yes, so do your own research on the funds also, and also be ready for the questions. You can already know the type of question people will ask you. And if you don't, then try to test your pitch, not to VCs first, but maybe to other people. Test your pitch to your friends, to communities you're involved in. There are always people happy to do that. There are also lots of events, pitching events, either for pitch practice or to pitch to angel investors. I actually do that also. I have a buy me a coffee page, and I recently created an extra, like something, a different category for people to be able to book a meeting with me if they want to test just the pitch. And you know, I actually have someone next week I'm going to have a chat with, because she wants to talk to VCs, but first she wants to test her pitch, the way she presents it, what is included in it, and get some feedback, some question, what will be the hard question. And once you get to know the VC, you quickly see what the main question they're asking nonstop. And some questions are kind of obvious. If you're, for example, if you're a B2C company, they will need to see some specific metrics. If you're a B2B company, they will need something else. If you're a deep tech company, well, good luck for that, because most of the people won't understand your technology, and you will have to do lots of extra work to show why your technology is cool, or talk to VCs who are specialized in deep tech. But you know, depending on what you're working on, you can predict what kind of question, what will make them tick. And then every time you have a meeting with a VC or with an angel or with someone who understands VCs, try to take notes of the question, because chances are that you're going to get this same question, or more or less the same, again and again and again.
No, thank you, Amandine. That's really interesting. I love the concept of smart money. You know, what actually are you asking for? I think that's a good lesson for everyone, whether you're a founder or not.
Yeah, I totally agree with all of that. And in terms of practicing the pitch, I would say just practice, and you don't realize like how differently you do it each time, and kind of you just evolve into someone that talks so much more confidently about your startup. And the more you do it, and the more you do it, the more questions you get asked, and then you realize that people ask the same questions, and then by the time you've done it 50 times, you actually know all the questions that are going to come up. So I'd really resonate with that. From my perspective, obviously a bit different, but I do have to apply for funding every year from the big corporate that sponsor my startup. So even though it's not venture backed, I do need to do that. And one of the biggest things is understanding the market opportunity. And that means that you need to understand who is going to buy your product, who they are in a lot of detail, and why they would buy it, and then how many of those customers there are. And if you can understand what the market opportunity is, that's very interesting for your investors, because that's their then return on investment if you can capture that market. So I'd say really focus your research on that market opportunity and how large it is for your particular idea.
There is actually one thing that you remind me of, and if you don't mind, I'd just like to jump on that back also, and say that there are many ways of funding your company. And yes, you have grants, you have building a company like you do within another organization. You have like lots of different things, and so there is not just one way of building a company, but many, and everyone has to do their own path. And when it comes to funding, well, maybe you can also ask yourself, do I need external funding right now? Maybe not, because something to understand is that it takes a lot of time, and more importantly, all your headspace for a lot of time. So let's say if you have a founder or co-founder of or two, maybe they can continue to work on the company and on the technical aspect or whatever, but that means that at least one of you will have to be really involved in taking meetings with VCs, preparing every time, working on the pitch, working on getting to know your market, for example. VCs will ask you a lot about that, but that means always getting the latest information, always working on what you're saying. I mean, it's really time consuming, and then raising money takes time. It's not a matter of a couple of meetings and that's it. You know, it's a long discussions to have. And so most often also VCs want to build a relationship over a long period of time. So they want to see your evolution. And so even if they're not going to invest right now, maybe in 6 months, maybe in a year, they will be right for you because they have followed your journey. And so, you know, it's a relation to build. So it takes lots of time. And if maybe you have an idea to start making money, well, go for it. And then that doesn't mean you're never going to raise external investment, but maybe you can start getting some money in some way by having clients right now. And then in a year or in 2 years, once you have proven your business through these clients, you can go to VC and say, okay, now I have a very strong traction, and the relation will be different, and the ask will also be different. When you're very early, you're going to give away, well, more of your company and also for a smaller valuation. But as you get more clients, if you get money already coming in, you can justify a bigger valuation, which means that you are in a better position to negotiate, which is something that is not negligible. So that's also to take in consideration. Can you bootstrap a bit more, even if potentially it means not paying yourself for another 6 months or another year? If you can do that, maybe that's the best way to go. I mean, every situation is different, but there is not just one way of building a company.
No, I think it links to what Sophie was saying earlier, isn't it? It's about, you know, the whole skills. Being an entrepreneur is more than just, you know, having a good idea. It's about how you build those relationships, how you have what Harriet's saying about financial literacy, you know, how you're aware of your network and smart money, which you're talking about as well. It's a big theme. And I suppose kind of coming on to kind of my last question for you all would be kind of thinking about kind of what's your go-to kind of motivation technique, whether it be a book, a blog, a podcast, someone you follow on Instagram or Twitter. You know, who do you go to for your inspiration or pick-me-up moment? Sophie, can I come to you first?
Yes. So I am a big podcast fan. And this is a pretty common one, but I love How I Built This, which is a NPR podcast out in the UK, out in the US, where they talk to founders of big successful startups about their journeys. But they really take it back to like the basics of how that person started, where they grew up, every lump and bump along the way. It doesn't feel so much like they just glamorize the journey. So I really love that. The other thing I really love to do is follow inspirational people and founders on Instagram, and just kind of get immersed in what they're doing, what they're putting out there, stuff that they're sharing there as well. I actually go to Instagram quite a lot for inspiration too.
No, that's great. And what she said, I'm going to ask actually all of you, just drop that in the comments so Alex can share it on the YouTube, because I think we're going to get some great recommendations after this. Amandine, over to you. Kind of what's your go-to?
Yeah, I like to read, but I don't really have one book to recommend. You know, it really depends on your mood. And sometimes there are some books that I really like, and sometimes because of my mood, I just don't feel like reading this type of book anyway. So I'd say what really motivates me is first my co-founder. I think it's very important. We haven't really talked about that much, but it can be a good thing or bad thing. If my co-founder is really pissed off because he's stuck into something, or something doesn't make sense and he had to find a hack to do something else, well, I am pissed off too. And actually, I'm not pissed off, I'm sad, just because I can't do anything to help him. And as a CEO, I feel that my role is kind of to support him build what we're doing the way he wants, and not feel frustrated in any way, which is very hard and almost impossible. But yeah, I feel that it's kind of my responsibility. And so what really motivates me is when my co-founder is excited. I don't have necessarily the technical ability to understand deeply why it's exciting and why he's so happy, but you know, we have this chat and he's like motivated and he wants to do things, and immediately I am shut up and I want to do it, and you know, I'm super excited. So that's my number one motivation. And then talking to other founders is really motivating me. I for sure, I also spend a lot of time on Twitter and hearing these amazing stories, but I think I always have this kind of down to earth vision where I know that maybe they're saying this on social media, but I know that social media isn't necessarily true, right? So what I love is really hearing small success, small wins from fellow founders. I know that their story is true, but also pure, and it's just happening right now. And so just having this small conversation with someone who did something he's happy about, how something turned out, and just celebrating small wins with them, I think it's really important to me. So that's why being involved in a community is really key. I've been trying to build also a small community around my YouTube channel, and that's why I mentioned that I wanted to share more about my own experience as a founder through videos, and I need to do more, just because by doing these interviews, talking to founders, I am building a small community, and people that I talk to, people who come to the channel regularly, they want to share their story, but they also ask me a lot about my own startup regularly. And I'm like, okay, if some people are interested, we need to find a way to like have a two-way conversation with everyone, which is not always easy. And you have to think how you want to shape this community. And so, yeah, just sharing stories with real people that are facing challenges, celebrating small wins is a big motivation for me.
That's great. Thank you, Amandine. And last but not least, Harriet, over to you. Kind of what's your go-to resource for people?
Thanks, Holly. Yeah, for me, it's definitely like what gets me out of bed in the morning is the startup team. There's 5 of us now, and obviously when you start out, it's pretty much just you and your vision. But kind of going through that journey of bringing other people into your vision has been so great. And then kind of the fact that we're this little team that believe this thing is going to work, and there's a bit of us against the world type feeling about it. So that is absolutely that for me, the team, and kind of like Amandine said, the small successes, because there's a lot of failures. So you have to kind of celebrate those as well, because you're learning from them, but also celebrate the small successes as you go along.
And is there a book or a podcast, something you can share? Because I'm really keen from this session that, you know, we talked a lot about kind of sharing resources and material. Is that kind of what's kind of on your reading pile that you kind of recommend to those watching
definitely.
today?
So I love Elizabeth Day's podcast, which is called How to Fail, and that's really normalizing failure and talking about like how you can get success from failure. I really like that. In terms of books, I really recommend a book called The Range Range by David Epstein, and that's about the fact that you can come at something from having a really broad experience. You don't need to be a specialist, and that's something that really resonated with me. So 2 recommendations there, but I mean, otherwise I read fantasy fiction because sometimes it's nice to like get away from work. So make sure you have a balance in your reading list is my other piece of advice.
Brilliant, fantastic. Well, that hour has passed incredibly quickly. I always worry as the chair of the panel, are we going to have enough content? And I don't know why, because we always seem to run out of time. Thank you to everyone who has joined in and joined today's session as part of the Athena. Please remember, any questions, please, we'll do follow-ups, and you can post them on our Twitter page, and using the Athena Hackathon hashtag as well will bring it to our attention. Enjoy the rest of the event, and good luck to all of our hackers tomorrow, and wish you the very best. Thanks all. Goodbye now.
Thanks everyone. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks and good luck.